worship service of Grace United Church in Wellsville, New York. We're so glad that you're joining us today, and we hope that you find this service meaningful and applicable to your life. Over the past several years, throughout the course of the pandemic, many of us have reevaluated our priorities. Now, a silver lining of the pandemic, if there is one, is that it gave us time and opportunity to reevaluate our priorities. In light of that, many people are changing their jobs. The Labor Department's most recent jobs summary suggests that roughly 4 million Americans have been quitting their job each month in a trend that has become known as the Great Resignation. A recent Harris poll found that half of working Americans want to make a career change. Now, I remember when we were holed up in our Tennessee home at the beginning of the pandemic, when weeks of shutdowns turned into months. Do you remember when we were awaiting the approval of the vaccine? In the midst of the pandemic, Mark and I and our daughters and son-in-law, we had lots of time to talk about our lives and our futures and our goals. We had time away from the busyness of time and of life to reevaluate. That respite helped us consider where we wanted to place our priorities and what we wanted to do in the next chapter of our lives. All of us turned the page. Everyone in my family, we switched to something new. New schools, new jobs, new lives. Have you resigned from a job? Most of us write up a formal resignation letter and we dutifully submit it to the appropriate person in charge, whether it's in human resources or a direct supervisor or the board of an organization. There may have been a time in your life where you responded, though, a little bit more viscerally. Frustrated, you may have scribbled your resignation on a paper or on a napkin or whatever was handy to let your employer know of your intentions. This is kind of what Dustin Snyder did. He'd had enough. He was tired of the long work weeks and the low wages and the grumpy customers. You see, he was the assistant general manager of a McDonald's restaurant in Bradford, Pennsylvania. But early in September of 2021, he drafted a petition to the regional office. He encouraged his workers to join him. He said, "Why would you want to work for a company that doesn't value you?" He said, "You've been here for 5 years. What have you got for it?" Nothing. Then he invited his workers to sign it. "We are all leaving," his petition stated, "and we hope that you'll find employees who want to work for $9.25 an hour." Nearly all of the 24 day shift employees added their names. They all knew that just 20 miles away, employees at the McDonald's across the border in New York did the identical work, receiving New York's minimum wage of $15 an hour. Now, this wasn't a strike, and it wasn't a protest. To Dustin and his low-wage employees, it was a simple statement of fact. He faxed the petition to the regional office in Buffalo, and moments later, the phone rang. The regional supervisor asked why had he done it, and he responded that he was just trying to get better pay for his workers. She told him that nobody would get a raise, and if they didn't like it, they all could quit. And nearly all of them did quit on the spot. They removed their headsets and they abandoned their stations at the drive-thru and at the cash registers. The line at the drive-thru began to grow longer and longer. Mystified customers watched as the employees congregated in the parking lot. They watched Dustin as he locked the building and hung a sign up on the door. On it, he had scribbled in blue highlighter, the only pen that he could find, "Due to a lack of pay, we all quit." A man came out to Dustin from his car and he says, "We just want a quarter pounder and fries." Dustin yelled back that they just wanted to be paid more and to be treated better. When Dustin told his general manager what they had done, she wasn't upset. She was even sympathetic. She even decided to join them. She texted her night shift employees and she told them what the day shift had just done and that she too was going to quit. Most of the night shift did the same thing as the day workers. Dustin and Stephanie, they spent the next few days helping their workers to find better jobs. In some cases, driving them to other fast food restaurants in the area that were looking for workers. As for the Bradford McDonald's, well, it wasn't long before the store was up and running again. The franchise owner also owned the store that was across the border in New York, and he bussed in these $15 an hour workers from there to reopen the drive-thru, and then he hired a whole new crew of new employees from Pennsylvania. But he had to do it for $10 an hour. This gave his new workers the 75-cent raise that his former employees had been asking for. Now, the Bradford McDonald walkout wasn't, strictly speaking, a labor action. It wasn't an act of collective bargaining. It wasn't planned out in advance. The handwritten blue highlighter poster was ample evidence of this, that it wasn't planned. It's just an example of the Great Resignation. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, workers across America, professionals as well as shift workers, they've been rethinking the work that they do. In some cases, they've decided to walk away from it, sometimes to new jobs, and other times to no jobs at all. Today's gospel lesson tells a story of someone who walks away from it all. It's the Apostle Peter. The job he walks away from is commercial fishing. Remarkably, this incident from John 21 is the second time the Gospels describe Peter walking away from that same job. The first time is recorded in Luke chapter 5. After a long day of unsuccessful fishing, Jesus invites Simon Peter to take him out in his boat for one last try. The net comes back bursting with fish, and Jesus says to Simon, "Do not be afraid, from now on you'll be catching people." Simon, along with his fishing partners James and John, rows to shore, and immediately they leave everything and they follow Jesus. Now, John's gospel has a different take on Simon's calling, but it too involves a resignation. In John's account, Simon's already a follower of John the Baptist. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, "We found the Messiah." He recruits him to quit John's band of followers and take up with Jesus instead. Jesus immediately changes Simon's name to Cephas, which means Peter. Clearly, this resignation is about a lot more than just changing jobs. It's more like swapping one life for another. Today's passage opens with these words, "After these things." It sounds ordinary, but it's anything but. The things that John's referring to are the death and the resurrection of Jesus. From the highs of the triumphal entry to the lows of Calvary, to the glad and unexpected news of Easter morning, Peter and his companions have seen it all. First, they were scared to death, then thrilled with life, the unexpected new life in Christ that has no end. In light of these things Peter and his friends have just experienced, his remark sounds like the biggest non sequitur of all time. "I'm going fishing." Really, Peter? Fishing? That same life you've already walked away from once? Peter's already been part of one great resignation. Now he's drifted back to the fishing net that he once, in his zeal, had abandoned altogether. What happens next in John's story is reminiscent of the first calling of Peter in Luke chapter 5. Jesus doesn't sit down in Peter's fishing boat this time. Now he's standing along at the shore as Peter and his companions row back, discouraged. All they have to show for their long night on the sea are sore backs and heavy hearts. "Children, you have no fish, have you?" It's a question, but also a statement. Does Jesus observe how high the empty boat is riding in the water? Or does he just know from the drooping of their shoulders as they're rowing in that this is a failed fishing expedition? This is like a lawyer's question. A very good lawyer never asks a question to which they don't already know the answer. And that is what Jesus is doing. He knows that they've had a miserable, heart-rending night. He just wants to hear them say it. They admit it, and then Jesus gives them a fishing tip. He tells them to cast their net on the right side of the boat. A crazy piece of advice. Why one side rather than the other? For some reason, these seasoned mariners take this beachcomber's advice, and once they do, the net comes back so full that they fear that it will split wide open. Then it dawns on the disciples who this man is. After this comes this touching scene where Peter dives into the sea to be able to reach Jesus just that much faster. Then they all gather on the beach for breakfast. Fish grilled over charcoal and bread. This meal stands counterpoint to another evening where they shared a heart-wrenching meal together, after which Peter found himself by another charcoal fire, denying any connection with Jesus. In contrast, you could call this meal the first breakfast. It takes place at daybreak rather than night, in joy rather than in solemnity, in hope rather than in fear. After breakfast, Jesus turns to Simon and asks, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Now, it's not at all clear what Jesus means by the word "these." There are three possible explanations. Maybe Jesus is asking Peter whether he loves Jesus more than any of the others love him. Is Peter's love greater than all of the rest? Do you love me more than these? Or he could be asking if Peter loves him more than Peter loves the others. Does Peter love Jesus more than he loves all of the other disciples? Do you love me more than these? Or maybe Jesus is asking Peter whether he loves following Jesus more than these fish nets. Does he love Jesus and following Jesus more than he loves the life of fishing? We can't really say for sure what Jesus means by this question, but we do know how Peter responds. He leaves his boats and his nets behind, not for the first, but for the second time, and he embarks on the life of an apostle. The task will occupy Peter all of the rest of his years. From that day forward, Peter begins to fulfill the challenge that Jesus sets before him. "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." "Feed my lambs, tend to my sheep." "Feed my sheep," Jesus says. Maybe these three questions are Jesus' response to Peter's three denials, demonstrating that he is up to the task of what will lie before him. Remember on the night of that first charcoal fire, Peter denied Jesus not once but 3 times. Here, Jesus allows him 3 opportunities to cancel out his denial with a promise of faithfulness. Peter ends this breakfast with a renewed sense of hope and a sense of calling. Before that morning, he would not have guessed that he would be the leader of the apostles, the spokesperson. It was Peter who proclaimed the story of the resurrection of Jesus on the day of Pentecost. It was his words that led to the transformation of thousands of lives throughout the ancient world. One of the things that strikes me about this story is the part that we might describe as Peter's resignation. As Jesus calls out from the shoreline, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" He's doing much more than inquiring about the catch of the day. He's challenging Peter and the disciples to consider what their life is truly about. Is the daily grind of fishing what they want to be the centerpiece of their life? Isn't there more that their lives are about? Upon recognizing Jesus, Peter leapt out of the boat. He knew what he loved. He knew that his life could be more than a life of boats and nets. His actions embodied his resignation from his former life and a leap into new pursuits. Now, we're all called to livelihoods. We're all called to work and to prepare meals, maybe even to flip burgers. We're called to care for others, sometimes for children or elders. We all have to spend time cleaning and sorting and driving to work and studying for classes. We all need to spend time caring for ourselves and our loved ones. But an essential component of all of our lives is thinking about questions of the meaning and purpose of our lives. These are the kinds of questions millions have asked themselves. I asked myself, and you may have asked yourself as well. Whether you are in retirement or whether you're launching your career or changing jobs or staying put, Whether we're helping care for family members or spending days in meetings surrounded by others, what is the focus of our lives? In our souls, we know that we must have more than just fish. Sometimes it seems like all we have is just fish, or sometimes even just empty nets. Sometimes when we have these feelings, it can be God speaking to us. We sense a need for something more. This feeling is what spurred me to pursue change. You see, when I was in Tennessee, I realized that my life could serve a different purpose, and God could have more in store for me. God opened doors for me and for all of the members of my family in new places to serve and new places for us all to grow. Peter never expected that he might have the key to open the door to the Gentile world. As the church was in its infancy, it was Peter who had a vision that told him that the message of Jesus was for all people, not only the Jews. Soon he found himself in the home of Cornelius, a Gentile, who was anxious to hear the story of Jesus and to pass it along to other Gentiles. Church history tells us that Peter found his way all the way to the church in Rome. Now, when we think about the future, we never know what to expect, do we? I wonder as a church how we'll grow. Time will tell. I imagine Peter on the day of Pentecost imagined that the church, this new following of believers, would be comprised primarily of Jews, but that's not how it worked out. As we at Grace United encounter folks and invite them to join us, sometimes those who we think will join us end up turning away, while others jump in, finding themselves quickly at home in our church family. As we celebrate the completion of 1 year of ministry together, we're surprised by some wonderful new ministries and new people that have emerged. As we've begun this next year together, we recognize that God may have even greater things in store for us. In the upcoming weeks, we'll be entering into a time of discernment. Next month, as a church, we'll gather together to do asset mapping. We'll take stock of the many gifts and abilities that our church family has, and we'll prayerfully consider next steps for us individually and as a church together. Maybe there are some things that we should be quitting. Maybe God is calling us to some new endeavors. At Grace United, our spirit of openness and radical hospitality poises us for growth. It poises us to touch the lives of people who find themselves far from God. And it does this even as our spirits are renewed and as we are growing spiritually. It's an exciting time. May we, like Peter, recognize who Jesus is. May we approach him with a sense of eagerness, ready to pour our energy into what God has in store for us. Amen.